Hello, my name is Sean Connaughty. I'm the chair and co-founder of Friends of Lake Hiawatha. Welcome to our presentation today. So I want to talk to you a little bit about the situation at Lake Hiawatha. So it is our beloved lake here in Minneapolis, and we've been working for 8 years to try to get the lake cleaned up and to address the egregious pollution sources that are impairing the lake and its diverse wildlife. This is a painting that I made that's a representation of how I see Lake Hiawatha and the issues that are happening there. And so you can see that there are ecological concerns, and there's also a great deal of biodiversity that is happening there. All of these animals that are represented in this painting have been observed at Lake Hiawatha. So first, I'd like to talk a little bit about the history of this place. It used to be known as Rice Lake, and this place, including the confluence of the Mississippi and Minnesota rivers, as well as the chain of lakes and the city of Minneapolis, is the sacred homeland and birthplace of Dakota peoples. Pedote encompasses this entire area. And so you can see these maps from 1835, 1839, and 1852, which all show the trails that were developed by the first Minnesotans, the Dakota people. And those trails go right by Rice Lake and connect Cloudman Village at Bede-Makaska to Coldwater Springs. And so we can see that Rice Lake was a part of the life of Dakota peoples. Now, Rice Lake was larger than Lake Hiawatha is today. It was surrounded by a massive wetland complex. The changes that have occurred at Rice Lake, Lake Hiawatha. Okay, so and the green represents wetlands. And you can see that in 1895, there's a large wetland complex. You can see the Minnehaha Creek is meandering through this wetland complex. And then you can see that by 1938, all traces of wetland were removed. The shore was walled. The creek was straightened. And I want to talk a little bit about the process that happened that altered Lake Hiawatha. And so in 1929, the Park Board bought the land surrounding Rice Lake, and then they proceeded to dredge Rice Lake and fill in the wetlands with the spoils of that dredging. They straightened the creek and walled the shore. And this is a photograph from 1934 when the golf course was nearing completion. And so Hiawatha Golf Course is built upon the former wetlands of Rice Lake. You can see that prior to the changes that took place, that Rice Lake was a very adaptable, changing, living lake. And so in this artwork that I created, I took the earliest maps of Rice Lake all the way from 1854 up until 1929. And so you can see when they are overlaid on top of each other that there's much adaptation that occurred over that time period. So you can see the meandering changes of the creek and the changes of the shape of the lake as it adapted to changing conditions and the changing climate. And currently, so Lake Hiawatha is fixed in place. And so after the alterations that took place of Rice Lake, the shape of Lake Hiawatha became fixed in place, as did Minnehaha Creek. And just to put Lake Hiawatha in context, you can see here that upstream is Lake Minnetonka, which is the headwaters of the Minnehaha Creek. And Minnehaha Creek runs down and then passes through Lake Hiawatha, and then joins the Mississippi River, and then it meets the Minnesota River, and then it travels on for 2,000 miles and continues until it reaches the Louisiana Delta, and there it enters the Gulf of Mexico. I want to talk about how Lake Hiawatha has recovered from this alteration that took place from 1929 to 1938, and now we see that some of the biodiversity has been restored to this lake, and It is currently home to numerous species of animals. It is our most biodiverse lake in Minneapolis. We've been conducting biodiversity survey for several years now, and every time we observe a new species, we document that. And also, we've been working, collating data that we find on iNaturalist.org and eBird to utilize the citizen science that takes place as folks observe and document wildlife species as they come through Lake Hiawatha. And so you can see the high concentration of observations at Lake Hiawatha, and especially in this lower area, the southern portion of the lake, which we call the Lake Hiawatha Delta habitat. And that's the heart of the biodiversity at Lake Hiawatha. And so though there were no wetlands remaining after the alterations took place, we have seen that sediments have accumulated and that area has been colonized by plants and animals, and now is the heart of the biodiversity and of a critical habitat for our region. We've seen increase in biodiversity, and I want to just make a note about beavers. And so the park board has historically trapped and killed beavers on a pretty consistent basis throughout its history. And in 2015, the park board stopped trapping and killing beavers. And so beavers were able to establish themselves, and they made their home in the Lake Hiawatha Delta habitat area. And then we really saw major improvements and increases in biodiversity in that habitat. The great horned owls moved in, and they successfully raised several broods of owlets at Lake Hiawatha. We feel the reason for that return was the beavers doing their work, creating channels through the wetlands, helping to flush it out. And also we removed literally tons of trash from that wetland habitat area. With the channels that the beavers had created, they were able to flush out the pollutants from what was essentially a monoculture of cattails, which, we love cattails and they're good food for the animals. These are all photographs that we've taken, and bald eagles so the eagles will come and they will feed on the fish, the beavers, and a family of otters lives at Lake Hiawatha, North American river otters, and mink live at Lake Hiawatha, as well as muskrat. And there's an adult beaver in the wintertime, also an osprey. So Lake Hiawatha is also a critical stop on the Mississippi River Flyway. And millions of birds traverse this flyway on their migration from north to south and south to north. These migrating birds will stop at Lake Hiawatha, and oftentimes Lake Hiawatha is the only open water in the area, and so it's important that be present and clean and have its abundant life. In addition to the biodiversity that we're seeing, I'd like to talk now about some of the challenges that are facing Lake Hiawatha today. As we saw, the dredging of the lake and the golf course being built upon the spoils of the wetland, and the wetlands being removed from this area, and the area losing its adaptability. In 2014, just as we were beginning what was to be a master planning process to improve the 18-hole golf course at Hiawatha Golf Course here on Lake Hiawatha, there was several events of large rainfalls that resulted in the water level rising to such a level that it overtopped the berm separating the golf course from the lake. It flooded the golf course. It overwhelmed their pumping system and caused damage to the golf course. And as a result, the golf course was closed for much of the remainder of that season, and parts of the golf course were closed over the next season. So that event of that flood caused the park board to put on pause their efforts to create this master planning process. And they announced to the public that they had discovered that they were pumping groundwater illegally into Lake Hiawatha. It turned out that they had a permit for the irrigation of the course, meaning watering the course, but instead they were pumping hundreds of millions of gallons of water out of the golf course to dewater it, and were pumping hundreds of millions of gallons of water into Lake Hiawatha. With that revelation came the decision that it was time to reevaluate the practicality, sustainability, and reasonableness of continuing to pump, and that decisions would need to be made as to the use of this land. And the pumping has continued, and that began the master planning process that we know today. Golf course pumping has continued to increase over the years. And, what started at 0 gallons being pumped in 1962 has now reached the volume of 400 million gallons annually. And so that's 1 million gallons a day. And 400 million gallons, just for context, is the entire contents of Lake Hiawatha and half of a Lake Hiawatha being pumped every year. And this water that is being pumped into Lake Hiawatha is polluted, and it has high concentrations of phosphorus. Lake Hiawatha is listed as impaired by the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency for high phosphorus levels, meaning the phosphorus levels in Lake Hiawatha are unacceptably high and pose a risk both to aquatic life and to the habitat and to folks who visit and enjoy and love Lake Hiawatha. Golf course pumping produces hundreds of pounds. Additionally, there's a massive stormwater system that also is discharging its pollution directly into Lake Hiawatha. That stormwater system encompasses 920 acres of Minneapolis. It's a very large, urban, densely populated area, and there's no filtration on that stormwater system that discharges the contents of those streets into Lake Hiawatha directly. And as a consequence, we see incredible quantities of trash. And in addition to that, additional nutrients are discharged into the lake from that large watershed, and massive amounts of sediment, as well as many dissolved pollutants. This is not an uncommon sight. Every time that it rains, we see a fresh flow of trash. And Friends of Lake Hiawatha have been doing this volunteer work where we collect and remove trash from the lake. And we started in 2015. And so here you can see the scale of the pipe shed that discharges into Lake Hiawatha directly without any filtration. And so there's a whole lot of storm sewer pipes dumping into the lake without filtration. So we've been asking for stormwater treatment for this pipe for 8 years now. And as of today in 2022, there's still nothing in place. We've kept track of our trash removal efforts because of the doubts that we heard and the initial rejection of our ask for stormwater treatment. It was important for us to clearly demonstrate and document the quantity of trash that we were collecting so that they could grasp the scale of what we're talking about here. This is not just normal, a few pieces of litter here and there. We're talking about tons. We have recently surpassed 10,000 pounds of trash removed from the lake. And I got to tell you that most of that is plastic. And so it takes a lot of items to make one bag of trash, which weighs 20 pounds. So we've carefully documented every bag. We're currently at 10,500 pounds of trash that we removed since we started cleaning. Additionally, all of this phosphorus that is being discharged into the lake from golf course pumping and untreated stormwater is resulting in frequent toxic algal blooms. This year, algae blooms started exceptionally early. In the first week of June, we were already seeing cyanobacteria blooms, and we had to put out warnings for people to keep their pets and children out of the lake. It's unsafe. Here, just as a demonstration of the quantity of sediments that are being discharged into the lake, is me standing on the sediment pile that is accumulated in front of the 43rd Street pipe. So that comes from the streets of Minneapolis. What we would find is we would clean an area, look great, and then it would rain, and then the trash would all be back, and we'd have to start our process again. And so we've been endlessly cleaning this lake for 8 years now. And additionally, Lake Hiawatha is impaired both for phosphorus pollution and bacteria. Again, the sources of pollution for the lake are golf course pumping and untreated stormwater, as well as stuff that comes in from the creek. As this master planning process began, Friends of Lake Hiawatha have been deeply involved and very vigilant to make sure that we saw this as an opportunity for stormwater treatment to end the pollution both from pumping and untreated stormwater discharge. And also was critical to us that the existing wildlife residents be protected and that their habitat be protected. And we saw opportunities to increase wetland storage that the park board through initially we examined the possibilities of an 18-hole course that was thoroughly studied. Of course, the park board has spent $800,000 on studies of the hydrology, sustainability of the pumping operation, and numerous studies looking at so many different angles. So what we have arrived at over 8 years of community negotiation was the Hiawatha Master Plan. And so we also have to talk about the historical aspect of this golf course to the African American community and golfers. So as we engaged in this master planning process with the community, there are many stakeholders that came to the table. Some folks came to the table wanting to eliminate golf, and others came to the table wanting to preserve all 18 holes. Through this process, we learned a lot about the history of Hiawatha Golf Course. This golf course has been here, since the 1930s and has a rich history. And one of the most important histories of this golf course is that it was one of the first golf courses in Minneapolis to allow Black golfers both to golf the course and to have Black people admitted into the clubhouse. And the golfer Solomon R. Hughes was integral in desegregating Hiawatha Clubhouse and worked to desegregate the PGA. So recognizing and acknowledging that history became an important part of this master planning process. Myself, and I think many of people who come at it from an ecological angle, perhaps were not interested in golf or having golf be a part of this landscape in this public space. And, many people want restored access to this land. Many people are concerned about the lake and its ecology. We are hearing from our Dakota friends that the lake has been despoiled and has not been respected. The water needs to be cleaned, and the animal relatives need to be honored and respected to have clean water. And so, as you can see, there are many stakeholders that have contributed to this conversation and to the decision that resulted. After all of the hydrological studies that BAR Engineering and in concert with working with the city of Minneapolis, the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District, the U.S. Geological Survey, the DNR, the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, all of these agencies have been involved in understanding and assessing, the limitations and possibilities of this site. And what was determined was that retaining 18 holes and maintaining the function of the floodplain and the ecological requirements of this lake and this place, the result was that it was determined that 18 holes was not feasible. And therefore, the master plan involved reducing the golf course to 9 holes, equalizing the lake with the land, restoring ecological function to the floodplain. Of course, that has created a great deal of controversy around this debate, passing or not passing of the Hiawatha Master Plan. With the discussion amongst the many stakeholders and, the conclusion that 18 holes is no longer sustainable. So I feel like what we're going through here, in Minneapolis is the consequences of our engineering failures, our hubris regarding our belief that we could dominate and control nature and restrict and channel her. And it's a difficult process. We're putting together a puzzle, and there are many pieces. But I'm hopeful about the future of Lake Hiawatha. And I want to talk a little bit about how I see what we're doing here and what is happening maybe in a larger view, in that this place right here in our region, this area is where the destruction really began. Lake Hiawatha, formerly Rice Lake Scene, is very near the epicenter of the beginning of the manifestation of manifest destiny in this area, and the consequences of that, both in human costs and in ecological costs, is continuing to this day, expanding outward, consuming habitat, thinking, that we think that we can own the land and that we can take whatever we want and profit from it, and that there is no need for us to give back, and that we can simply take. And the natural law of reciprocity begs to differ with that. You cannot sustainably live in the environment only by taking from it. You have to give back. We have taken everything from this place, and nature in its power is restoring health to itself and trying to clean the water and trying to bring back the wildlife. And that is happening in human stewardship, given the example of Dakota peoples who were stewards of this land for millennia, and the damage that we have done in such a short period of time as we, as the white settler descendant, are seeking to give back and work in reciprocity with nature. And so I see this place, which was entirely made into an anthropogenic space in which all traces of habitat and wildlife were essentially wiped clean from this place, and the incredible biodiversity that we see now as in nature's recovery, which we are stewarding along and helping in the ways that we can. It is our responsibility to restore health to this place. And also, I have hope for the future because I see the work that is happening here, and I see the work that is happening in all throughout our city and our country. In different places, people are stewarding the land. Indigenous voices are joining the conversation. We are learning from the original stewards of this land. What is to be done? Okay, so it's been a difficult process in getting the Hiawatha Master Plan to be passed. Yet the ecological conditions and the damage that the park board and the city pollution that they're discharging into the lake continues. There is a great deal of urgency. Additionally, our climate is changing. First, we got to come together as a community. And the harsh reality is that no single stakeholder is going to be able to have everything that they want. We need to urge our park commissioners whom we elected to do this work. We need them to push through this difficult process. I mean, this is our reckoning. This is the hard work we have to do. We have many difficulties to face, and this is just one of them. So how the community can help. I mean, you can write and talk with your elected park commissioners. You can speak at a public meeting. You can write letters. You can have conversations in your community. You can join in the restoration work that we're doing as we do the planting and restore medicines and foods to this place and restoring biodiversity. So that is what folks can do. Friends of Lake Hiawatha have worked with the community to compromise in a 9-hole golf course that honors and celebrates the history of the course, that provides opportunities for Black youth. Also, there are additional economic opportunities that were included in the plan thanks to Latricia Vita, bringing forward amendments that strengthen the benefits for the Black community. And we support that. And we want to honor the history, but we also want to honor the Dakota history, and we want our Dakota friends to be a part of this process and to hear their voices and to lead the way in the restoration and recovery that needs to happen here. We feel that what we have arrived at, although it is only a rough framework in the Hiawatha Master Plan, can still be adjusted and adapted within the parameters of what serves all of the stakeholders.